Right, okay, I think we can make a start. So welcome everyone to the fireside chat between Northumbria University and Citrix. So just to introduce myself, and we'll be doing some more introductions in a minute. My name's Steve Berry. I'm an education lead within Citrix UK. So we've organised this webinar in partnership with Northumbria University, very much for us to have a fireside chat with them, just to talk about really what their experience has been like, what they've learned over the last sort of 15 months. I think it's fair to say it's been a highly challenging time for a lot of people, but also it's also been a time of immense activity and immense creativity and innovation. So really what we'd like to do today is pretty much explore that and what Northumbria have seen over the last few months. So just in terms of housekeeping today, as I spoke earlier, clearly if all attendees, unless you're actually part of the panel, could keep your microphones on mute, please, and keep your cameras off. What we would like to do, if you have any specific questions, please do put them in the chat, and we will endeavour to get them. Any we can't get to within the meeting, either as responding to within the chat, or alternatively via actually bringing you into the meeting, then we will ideally come back to you afterwards with some responses to those. So I mean, we've pretty much seen Northumbria University as leading the way in many ways in terms of how it's modernised and leveraged technology to deliver active blended learning over the last 15 months or so. So we're going to get into that shortly. Before I do that, we'd like to do some introductions. I've introduced myself, but what I'd like to do now is ask my esteemed colleague, Craig Bramley, to introduce himself. Craig?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Hi there, everybody. My name is Craig Bramley, and I'm a lead systems engineer, and I'm also the lead education technologist here at Citrix. And I've had the privilege of working with Simon and Quinn and the wider team at Northumbria University over the last few years.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Craig. And Simon and Quinton, if I could ask you to introduce yourselves in turn, please.
Thank you, Steve. So my name's Simon Corbett. I'm the IT director at Northumbria University. I've been in post just coming up for 2 years now. And at Northumbria, we're actually quite involved in a big strategic program of development at the moment across IT services. So it's quite an interesting time for us at Northumbria. And Citrix has played a part of that, of which we're going to describe more later.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Quinton.
Hello, afternoon, folks. My name's Quinton Smith. I work within what's called the configuration team, and we look after all the desktops within the university. We do all the imaging and all the rest of it. And we've also, there's 2 of us within the team, look after the Citrix environment.
Excellent. Right. Thanks, everyone. So, OK, what we'd like to do now is we're going to get into the event itself. So clearly, we've had the impact of COVID-19 pretty much coming in early 2020, and it's fair to say it's still with us. Ideally, we're coming out of lockdown and so forth, but it has been a period of immense pressure, but also immense change and innovation, and a combination of tactical responses and also more strategic thinking. So I guess, Simon, really just to sort of start off with that. Clearly, we've had the COVID-19 lockdown. How's that impacted your IT strategy over the last few months?
So it's interesting, Steve, actually, because we had an IT strategy that was written at the start of the year, so just a few months before lockdown, actually. And I guess as an IT services team, we'd always sort of thought that we wanted to be more flexible for our staff and students. So we had a sort of an anytime, anywhere type mantra flowing through the strategy. So in some respects, we were kind of one step ahead because we were kind of thinking about that across Northumbria anyway. And I guess what COVID-19 did, and if you think back to March last year, there was a sudden rush for remote working, and that element of our strategy then was accelerated at a rate of knots that I guess we weren't expecting when we wrote it earlier in the year. But it was certainly in line with what we were thinking. And I think a lot of organisations are now thinking down the same lines of that anytime, anywhere.
Yes, I think we've certainly seen that organisations that, if you like, had a remote working strategy and active blended learning strategies were perhaps able to weather the whole COVID-19 storm more than maybe some others were. And Craig, I know you wanted to dig into some of that with Quinton as well, didn't you?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So Quinton, I mean, at this stage, how many users have actually been transitioned to cloud, and is there sort of a phased approach where, for example, you're concentrating on either staff or students to start off with?
I think back when when this all started off, it was really the we've got 6,000 PCs sitting in the university, and it was at the time we were looking at, well, how can we use those machines? How can we use the cloud? How can we use all these technologies to be able to get our users that were sitting at home with either a laptop that didn't have the right software on, or it didn't have enough grunt in it to be able to run the applications? And it's the same for the students. So from that point of view, it was like, well, how do we do this? We've already invested all the money into the remote piece, into all of the PCs, and it's like they were sitting there, and it was like we'd looked at other applications that gave us the remote PC usage, but when you actually looked at what they were doing, it just didn't quite fit in with what the technology that Simon had been looking at and what we were looking at as a university to go forward with. So it was like, well, how do we do this? So the remote PC, when we started to play with it as such, and if one of the first was, I think I turned around to yourself and said, can I get some access? How do I get remote PC for myself to try out? And he gave us like a 90-day trial of it, and it was like, oh, hold on, this is starting to work. And then roll it out to a few other people within the team to go have a look at this, see what you think about it. So it was like, all right. And because obviously it's remote PC, we can use any application that's sitting on there, but we can also use any of the hardware that's there. So the graphics and all the rest of it, some of the animation suite, which was one of the first takers of the uptake, it was like, look, they can use the graphics card. And it's like, but don't we have to do this? No, we can actually use the physical graphics card that's there, and the end person that's sitting at home doesn't have to have. They can have a Chromebook, and it's still going to give them all the graphics. It's going to give the animation and all the rest of it. So it's that how we'll be able to sell it, to say, look, we've got this remote PC, we can do this. Now what do we need to do next for it? So that's how, what we wanted to do, and that's how we did it as such.
Yeah, so basically by looking at the remote PC sort of avenue, you were able to sweat the existing assets that you got on-prem and the physical machines.
Yep.
And use those GPUs as well.
Yes.
And then also rapid deployment as well, because you didn't have to create a virtual machine and then deploy virtual machines as such. And then from an application perspective, I know you've obviously delivered quite a lot of specialist applications as well. Were there any hurdles that you came across? I know one big hurdle is always Adobe licensing, for example, but
yeah,
sort of challenges in that sort of area.
It's always going to be licensing that's going to cause a headache, regardless. You can read the small print, you interpret it one way, legal will interpret it a different way, but the company will interpret it, go, no, you can't do it because of. Yes, the Adobe licensing, you've got to get it right as such. But a lot of the vendors, when we chatted to them, going, we're thinking of doing this, it's going to be remote PC. And they go, does the university own that device? Well, yes, we've bought that device. All right. Yes, that's fine. There are a couple of the companies like Bloomberg we didn't have the right licensing for. And they talked us through what we could do, how to do it, and all the rest of it. And the faculty went off, bought the little tick box to say, yes, enable now remote usage. And they were over the moon, the fact that they paid a little bit more, but then means they can do the teaching on site, but the students can then sit at home when the building's locked and all the rest of it and go, oh, I can use my Bloomberg software, I can use my animation software and the rest of it. So for a student, it's as Simon said, we want it to be able to do 24/7, which we've done. And it's there you go, there's the tick box. If you want to be at 2 o'clock in the morning, all of a sudden a panic that I need to use these applications, we've done it. And it's there for them waiting.
And Quinton, thanks very much for going through that. And I guess that sort of leads me into a question for Simon, really, because what we've talked about there are various user groups. Clearly got the dynamic now where people are having to work remotely and so forth. I mean, and with all this going on, how were you able, Simon, how were you able to sort of enable adoption? Were there any sort of specific tactics that you used or strategies to sort of drive adoption up?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I guess COVID helped us in some respects because we were forced into a move of remote working. And if you just take a step back from where Quinton was saying, I guess the setup at the university is, if you imagine we've got a load of labs around the university that are used as specialist labs depending on what program of study you're on. And so the concept of some students wanting to get into a lab, we just kind of moved that to remote. So we've leveraged the PCs in those labs. We've also obviously bought those physical machines. And Quinn and the team have provided a front end into that allows you a virtual entry into those labs. So for a student, actually that early adoption is quite straightforward for them. It's quite a straightforward concept. Instead of walking into the lab and sitting down in a PC, you walk in through a front end portal and you choose a PC and you virtually sit in front of it. So actually the concept and the early adoption for us was really helped by that. We also did quite a lot of work with staff and students across the place. We've got quite a lot of guides around there. We have a very strong TEL team, which is our technology enhanced learning team at the university here, and they produce quite a lot of video guides and straightforward things. But I guess we were really helped with that concept that it was simple to use for us, simple to use, straightforward, and that acceleration by COVID really helped us.
Yeah, so it's sort of simple, straightforward, and also a necessity, I guess, just for the continuity of learning.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think if it had needed an instruction manual of how to use the system, then we were probably doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's the way we approached it. It needed to be self-explanatory. It needed to be easy to use.
Yeah, indeed. And ultimately, I think in a previous conversation we had, you said you don't use a user manual to go on Amazon, do you? So it should be intuitive and user-friendly.
I think as well, Steve, sorry, that's a really important factor, because from speaking to many institutions within the UK, one of the biggest blockers for transition for these institutions is adoption.
Yes.
So getting the adoption right is key. It's vital.
I think so, Craig, and we were the same. I mean, we'd had some early conversations at Northumbria about how complicated was this going to be and what was this going to feel like as a user experience. And I guess key to this was building a user experience where it was obvious. It felt like you were walking into a lab. You were just doing it virtually. And you're right, Steve. The example I gave you, I think last time we met, was you don't get an instruction manual about how to use the Amazon website and buy anything in the world on Amazon. It's self-explanatory, and we wanted something similar of that kind of vein.
That's excellent. So I guess ultimately you had the whole sort of process in terms of how to bring people on and drive adoption. I mean, but you had different user factions there. You got the staff, you got the students, and so forth. Clearly the user experience, and we'll come on to that in a minute, was very, very important. You've mentioned that. But how were you able to sort of, I guess, again, in a remote environment, how were you able to sort of glean feedback from the user community as to how it was all going?
Yeah, and I think that probably has been harder. I think I'll be honest. I think like most feedback in IT services across higher education, further education, schools, you get the feedback when things go wrong, not when things go right. And so I think that has been hard to glean. I think, as an IT services department, you normally take it that if things are reasonably silent, then things are working quite well. We've obviously looked at the stats and looked at the usage, and we can see things being used. So I guess our main feedback has been no news is good news. There's clearly been teething problems as we rolled it out initially, but I think that the overall experience has been positive from people, and certainly the students has had a positive impact from that, we've heard. So.
Excellent. And I guess there's also people take for granted that IT is almost seen as another utility, isn't it? Whereby, people expect their connectivity to be there. They expect their experience just to be optimal, really. And I know you said it was difficult to gather feedback, but do you do sort of processes like sort of surveys, or is it captured more in NSS scores, or how is it? Were there some measurements that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we do surveys, and there are local surveys across the university, and the ones that we've done have been positive. The big key, I guess, like at the university level, is the NSS scores that are done by third-year students at the start of the year, so normally January to about April time. So they've just finished, and the results will be out in the next month or so. And there's a technical question in the NSS. I guess this year's NSS scores might be a little bit different because of all the difficulties through the COVID pandemic. But that would be a high indicator for us. So one of the questions on the NSS score.
Brilliant, thank you. And I guess with all that context in mind, I guess IT has had to be even more critical and important to the continuity of learning. I mean, it's always been incredibly important, but maybe the visibility of it has gone up considerably over the last few months. Do you think that that's changed, or how do you feel that that's changed the perception of IT? I think specifically within Northumbria, what's the view?
Well, I think it's been very positive for IT as a whole across Northumbria. I think it certainly made people realise the importance of the technology element of that, and suddenly having to remove, 30,000 students and 3,500 members of staff remotely at the drop of a hat last March was a challenge. And I must say, I've got a very strong team in IT, from a very strong leadership team and a very good technical team. And so I, as an IT director, I'm very lucky. And it was a very, very swift what we did last March to move everyone remotely. And so, I guess at a university level, people appreciate that, because people appreciate the smooth transition. And I think also at a university level, looking forward, where you may have invested in a physical campus, people are now starting to realise there's a digital campus as well. And so that has changed, and I think that probably has changed not just in Northumbria, but in other institutions as well, who are looking at more that digital campus rather than physical campus investment in the future.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think what you've illustrated there as well is I guess, the importance of a strong IT team, the importance of, keeping everyone sort of focused and so forth. But I guess, and, COVID has been very stressful for everyone, really. But I think in many ways, for IT teams, it has been really stressful. With the additional pressures and people getting passionate about wanting their connectivity and being able to function and work and so forth. And that must have been pretty stressful for you at the team. I mean, how did you manage that, and how did you manage to keep the team motivated over that time?
It is difficult, yes, and you might get a different answer if you ask Quinn.
Maybe I will.
But I guess we've done it with a smile on our face, right? And I guess, as I said, I've got a very strong leadership team and a very good team. But actually, what you found in IT services is everyone has actually wanted to support the university. Actually, people have understood the value that they're delivering and the value that they're giving the students. And I think people take pride in their work and want to do the best. So there has been some long hours, there has been some hard work, but I think people can actually see the value of what they've delivered, and the fact that we've moved staff and students online, and it's been a success, has been hugely rewarding for people internally as well. So.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Simon. So I guess one more from me for you before we move over to Craig and Quentin. You've been using, I guess you've used our technology and other people's technology for a number of years and so forth, but you have recently moved to the cloud, or moved more to the cloud, I should say. So what were the main drivers for you doing that, and what were the benefits you saw for doing that?
Yeah, and I'll not be dissimilar to a lot of people on this call. At the end of the day, it comes down to cost, right? It's a cost benefit. We've mentioned before that one of the drivers for us was to actually keep the physical devices, and we'd invested in physical PCs across the estate, and we wanted to keep leveraging those while they still had some value. And where we've seen opportunities in the cloud, we've leveraged that. So we have got the capability of spinning up Windows virtual desktops in the Microsoft. and we have leveraged other parts of our cloud infrastructure as well to give us cloud compute specifically for us in Azure. And I think it comes down to actually a sensible strategy where you really look at the cost benefit of where you're putting that compute and where you're putting that storage, because actually sometimes it needs to be next to the data.
Yes.
It can get very expensive in the cloud, and Quinn mentioned beforehand about some of the GPU stuff. So some of our specialist applications rely a lot on high GPU processing. That can get very expensive in the cloud if you're not careful. But on the other hand, we've got applications that run very, very well and are far more efficient to run in the cloud. So it's almost an individual case for us. But we've certainly benefited from moving some of our core stuff into the cloud for sure.
Brilliant. So it is very much a hybrid world, isn't it? So Craig, sorry, Simon.
No, I was going to say exactly the same, actually, Steve. Sorry, it's a very hybrid world, right? And I think having the flexibility is the key, so that you can flex your compute to where you need it and actually where it's most cost efficient for the organisation.
Yeah, indeed. Flexibility and agility being absolutely core. Thank you, Simon. So, Craig, I know you wanted to drill down into some of the more specifics around cloud with Quintin, didn't you?
Yes, Steve, that's right. So, Quintin, so are there any users still on premises? I think we've already deduced that there are. And, when do you intend to move them to the cloud, if indeed you actually do intend to move them to the cloud?
I think for us, it's, as Simon has said, it's almost a case-by-case study to see where the application actually fits in. Some of the applications that we do have, like other, or sort of like legacy applications, so it's kept on site as such. Putting it into the cloud, we've tried it either on a WVD or we've tried it on a server infrastructure, and it just doesn't quite work, or there's so much fiddling to try and get it to work. We always think, my colleague and I, Sylvie, if we think it's going to take over a week to get this one application to work in a WVD environment, to say, well, hold on, let's see what happens when we put it into this. That doesn't quite work, and then we put it back on site with some hardware, either it's a virtual server or whatever, and see if it actually where it fits in with it. So I think for us, there's always going to be that minority of applications that are going to be on site, but there's going to be more and more as we can move into the cloud to be able to go, right, we can do the following. I think for us, the GPU is going to be interesting conversation with companies to say, well, how can you reduce the cost of the cloud GPU when you can buy a workstation on premise, put the WVD software on and run the remote PC software? So we've got to have that little balance as such to how it works. But from us, the thing that we think about always is that with the Citrix environment, it's the HDX protocol. We've got the networking bandwidth and all the rest of it that is working in our favor, rather than the other way on, where people are going, oh, this is sluggish. And we always get it's not working as fast, and you try to explain what we're happening and how we're trying to do this, and it is trying to manage the user expectations over them physically sitting at a PC. Somebody coming into our office and all the rest of it. But now we're a remote community as such, and have been for the past year. People have got more used to, oh, hold on, I go to here, click on this, and I get to where my applications are. And people aren't bothered about where the app is as long as they can get to it.
Yeah.
That's the main thing for them. So from my perspective, it's like it's getting more and more easier to manage in the cloud. But the user, for them, they don't need to know where it is. They just know I can get to it. If it's the student, staff, or whatever, can I get to my application whilst I'm at home? That's the big thing.
Yeah. So having that capability to deliver an application from where it's most appropriate has been a pretty big benefit for you. And I know you mentioned HDX as well. So have you seen any sort of issues with performance for remote users that might be on, say, a low bandwidth or high latency connection?
We have. I think our old infrastructure, we had about 130 different countries within about a 2-year period that used it. With our new one, we've probably about 80 to 90 different countries, and we're talking about not just Europe, like Austria, Germany, France. We're talking about Australia, New Zealand, Russia, and America. And yes, there is some of the countries you can see that they do have low latency and issues. However, we had somebody that was out in Afghanistan using satellite communications to run the Citrix session, and we said, well, how was it? And it was like, well, I was able to do my course. And he went, okay, right. How was it? And it was like, well, it worked. Okay, can I have a bit more than it worked? So it again, it's, you know, I'm lucky. I live in an urban area and I've got a 200 meg connection into the network, but there are people out there that don't have that. The likes of people in Grasmere, even, where, you know, it's like a meg connection. And when you talk to them and find out, and it's like, well, it works now. I'm like, they're chuffed that it worked, and that they're over the moon that it worked, and they can get to it. And, you know, students, the teenagers, they start off, they look which university they want to go to. Some of their friends go to one place, some go to the other. And it's like my nephew and cousin and that, and you talk to them and go, well, I can get this at Northumbria, but I can't get it at other places. And you think, well, yeah, because, you know, no blowing Simon's trumpet, but it's like, you had, you know, we showed them it could be done, and it was like, okay, run with it, folks. Prove to me it'll work. Yeah. You know, and it, you know, there it is.
I mean, yeah, I mean, actually going back to what Simon was saying, in the perception of IT and how that's changed within the university, and what you've just said, Quinton, does the university actually look at the student experience now as a profit driver for the university? And is that something that, you know, HDX is assisted with?
I think it personally, somebody that would be, I've got to travel into work. So a student might be living quite close by, so they can easily get into a lab or whatever. But I think nowadays with students that can be almost anywhere taking a course, especially the distance learning students and all the rest of it, they do now start to look at, well, what does the universities, or how do they, and they start reading it, and it's like, oh, hold on. Oh, then they'll look off and say, oh, well, they provide that. Oh, so they're providing these applications, they're providing it remotely. And they go, oh. And, you know, some of the tech savvy ones know about Citrix or have heard about it, but there's others that go, oh, hold on. And they try it and they suddenly realize, actually, we can get the look and feel of a desktop that should be in front of us, but is actually in Northumberland building, sitting somewhere quite happily working away. So yeah, it's made a massive difference. And, you know, we've been using Citrix since 1999, so we must be doing something right for it.
Yeah, no worries. And then going to the WVD discussion. Now, one of the main benefits of obviously managing a WVD infrastructure with Citrix is cost control. So have you actually come across where, you know, scenarios where you've had to control costs with WVD? And can you talk us through, you know, how you did that, you know, how you actually managed those costs and actually calculated those costs as well?
It did. We engaged with a company that helped us put in the current Citrix infrastructure, and they went through some of the costs for the WVD experience as such, and showed us how we could save money because of the auto scale. And to be honest, we've looked at the auto scale and we thought, this sounds too good to be true. So we tried it out on a couple of machines. Just, you know, how IT people are skeptical about things. We tried it and it's like, well, that actually works. All right. So yes, they could give us the cost of if you permanently had this machine on. And then we started to look at it and think, all right, so Saturdays and Sundays, not a lot of students come in. And then we started to break it down by month. So we actually started to sit there and go like a month by month breakdown. So June and July, there's not going to be many students around. August, there's not going to be many around. And then so like September, the end of September, students start to come along. So we actually started to do a month by month breakdown of it all. So we could actually work out what the costs of the WVD were. So we then start to think, right, how many hours are they going to be? So run up to exam periods as such, they're going to want to use more. So we then said, right, they're going to use it for 9 hours a day or 7 hours a day. And then we started to map it against students. So for instance, somebody that's doing a fine art course probably isn't going to have a lot to do with WVD, but they're going to use the Office products that they can do. So it's like, right, we're going to be using those. So we were breaking it down, not quite to course level as such, but we were definitely breaking it down to the faculty level to be able to see who would be using what when. So it became quite a complex model, and sometimes it was like, are we going the right direction with this? I think the biggest thing was when we looked at the costs of the graphics. That was just and that was the for me was just, wow, if we have that for X number of years, we could actually pay for this. So we sort of we backed away from that once we realized the cost for that. But the auto scale, it is, for us, it's just absolutely wonderful technology. We can start bringing on machines at this time in the morning, bring them less at the weekends, and it's down to every 30 minutes, and you can do a number of tweaks with it that are just GUI. You know, we're not sitting there writing PowerShell to do it. It's just the GUI that we're using. Click, select this, select that. All right, and it's working, and you can watch the machines going up and down, especially with Director, and Director's part of the Citrix cloud, which is our monitoring software, and you can watch them coming up and down throughout the day, the week, the month, etc., and start to do our own calculations to go, wow, it is saving us money with that. You know, the fact of we're not having 20 WVDs on 24/7. I think off last week we had peak was 12 machines running, and it was like, all right, hold on, those other 8, they weren't on that day. So yes, that's how we're getting the costs under our belt to think, right, now we know how it's going to be in that. So yeah, that's how we've
also used other technologies like WEM, for example, to increase server density and processors and eliminate noisy neighbors and the such.
Oh yeah, those that I don't know if anybody here has used the old version of Citrix, so like 6.5, 6.4 and before, and it was a nightmare to be able to control it and to try and get the best use out of a machine because somebody's running this application. And then we were shown WEM, and it was like, really? Does that work? And you know, it's what, again, it goes back to the auto scaling. It's like, is this a salesman trying to tell me how to do it, or is this? And then when you try it and you go, we can get better usage out of it. We can, yes, there's always going to be other tools that can probably do things a little bit easier, but with WEM we can specify this is the test environment, this is the live environment, and we can then start cardinally going down into processes and all the rest of it to be able to control everything. And it is, as you say, the noisy neighbor that is running an application, and you're running some maths, so like SAS or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh look, and it's like, Ray, and it's beautiful technology, and it works. That's the thing, and you've got an interface that was looked after by Citrix, and it's like it gets upgraded, and because it's web, we don't have to worry about, oh, we've got to upgrade the consoles, we've got to do this. But with the Citrix cloud, that's all looked after by yourselves. We get the notification to say it's good to be upgraded, and it's like, great. So we're getting the new functionality within sort of like 10 hours of you putting in the new part, and it's like, get in, so don't have to worry about it. And as you say, it works. That's the main thing that we want from our point of view.
Yeah, and I mean, I think WEM's a really, exceptional feature. Cool. So thanks, Quinn. I'm just going to hand over to Steve.
Yes, thanks very much, guys. Yeah, really illuminating. Thank you. And I think just really picking up there on the theme there of sort of talking about a centralized cloud approach. And I guess this is a question for Simon. And I guess this is I guess a fairly provocative topic, but clearly with statements from the likes of JISC over the last few months and increased sort of cyber attacks on universities. I mean, Simon, has moving to a sort of centralized cloud delivery model, has that sort of helped you and the university with its security posture?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a whole, so the cloud models help us with security. We can certainly, in moving to Citrix Cloud, we leverage all of the investment that you've made on the security layer there, and that gives us a level of protection that certainly we didn't have with our old on-premise Citrix infrastructure. And that was one of the main drivers for actually doing something with it. Actually, in our strategy before COVID, I think, you know, it's a difficult one, security, and there's been a lot in the press, obviously, recently about higher education being under attack. I guess, you know, for me, phishing emails still remain the #1 attack vector, and you know, at a university level, that's very hard to manage with so many staff and students, and just one email, one click, and it's still by far the biggest attack vector. I guess what we have done with the Citrix infrastructure is we've cut out remote desktops. So you now have to, if you want to remote onto a desktop, you're coming in through a Citrix infrastructure now. So, you know, another attack vector that is very common, or used to be very common across higher education and further education establishments, is open RDP ports, so remote desktop protocol ports on a public IP address. And of course, you know, that's easy for bad actors these days. So what we have done is meant that everyone now is routed through the Citrix infrastructure if they want to jump onto a desktop, unless they're IT service and they're coming through a proper VPN. So we've done that to reduce the attack vector. Is it going to eliminate everything? Well, probably not. There's probably there's some clever people out there that will always exploit weaknesses. But I think moving to a Citrix cloud has certainly helped us from where we were in the position we were beforehand, Steve. And you know, it's a vulnerability for us had we not upgraded, for sure.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that, Simon. So I guess sort of mindful of time. So that was really helpful. So I guess as we, dare I say it, as restrictions start to be relaxed and so forth, the feedback, though, generally from speaking to universities and colleges and schools and so forth, is that things are not necessarily going to go back exactly how they were before COVID hit, really. And I think, bear in mind the successes that you've had in this period of intense creativity and activity as well, probably blends into that. But a phrase that we hear a lot, and it's been around for a while, but it's really come to the forefront in the last sort of 12 months or so, is the concept of blended learning. And that is pretty much, I guess, what everyone is doing at the moment. But as we move into what some people are calling the next normal, where do you see the blended learning approach? Do you see that as part of your future strategy or the wider strategy for the university?
So it's interesting. I think, you know, Northumbria will continue to be a campus-based university. I think, you know, the value of being a campus-based university can't be underestimated, right? And students on campus is where we want to be at Northumbria. I think we probably go back, Steve, to the flexibility point I made right at the start of this. And what we want to allow is flexibility, both for our staff and our students. And the kind of things I mean is, so I don't think, while things are coming back to normal at a university level, that's going to take some time. And, you know, so certainly for our international students, you know, it could take several months before things are opened up. And, you know, you've seen the situation in India that's horrific at the moment, right? So yes, a lot of our Indian students actually physically getting back on campus could be several months away now. I think we need to allow them the flexibility. But I think also students who are on campus will probably appreciate flexibility. So a student may have been into a lab to experience a piece of software and learn how to use something in the afternoon. We'd like to give them that ability to then go back home, and in the evening, if they wanted to go back and repeat what they've done or try something differently with what they've done, they don't have to come back onto campus and get into that lab. And actually that lab might not be an open access area on our campus. It might not be open at 10 o'clock at night. But actually, if we've got a means to be able to allow them to do that, then now the student has got some flexibility to repeat what they've done in the afternoon under instruction by their professor, and maybe, you know, try it out themselves and go into the lab and use the software again in the evening or on the weekends when they might want to do it. So I think from that approach, you know, that's the flexibility that we want to keep and keep going forward. And I think that's the flexibility that students today probably expect as well.
And then I think we'll come back to some of the key points there as well, that when we get towards the summing up, Simon, so thank you for that. And one thing that you mentioned earlier, if you like, was very much the growth in the digital campus. If you like, digital campus is something that coexists with a physical campus as well, and particularly in terms of the flexibility that's been seen as a real positive, particularly with the universities that have been able to deliver that kind of experience. But also there's been we've seen a number of universities take considerable increases in applications for people who traditionally would not be able to attend a physical campus, such as people who've got massive family commitments or carers and so forth. So I guess it has brought out these additional opportunities that we wouldn't necessarily want to turn off either. So I think that's been really illuminating.
Yeah, I think so. And sort of, distance learning courses and CPD courses that might get offered as well. There's certainly more flexibility around what you can do with that now on those types of programs, where you may never come to campus, right, on some of those distance learning courses. So that's true for sure.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so thanks for that, Simon. So Craig, I know you did want to quickly touch on with Quintin around cloud delivery model and DR before we get into
I am conscious of time as well, Steve.
Yeah.
Quintin, I mean, how has the cloud delivery model sort of changed your approach to DR? Because we see a lot of organizations that are now using cloud as DR, where previously they'd sort of tend to have secondary sites. I mean, is this something that Northumbria have looked at? And, what are some of the benefits of this approach?
Well, from us with the WVD, so like some of the spin-offs that we've got is that we just have the one gold image at this moment in time. So we update that gold image, we snapshot it, and then we push it out to our test environment and all the rest. And once it's in the test environment, get people to try it out, and then we can roll it out into production. Because we've only got this one image, we've got these snapshots that we've got in the cloud. Unless Sylvie and I go off and go click and delete everything, it's like, ooh, hold on. And the other thing with the DR, what people sort of like forget is that we want to keep on working as such. And because we've got some infrastructure on site, we've got some in the cloud, but what it does mean is that we ever lose everything on site, we can still keep on running with the cloud, because we've got the AD within the cloud and it's sitting there and it's been and you go, well, there you go, you can now get on with it and go with it. And it's also for us, because the cloud pane is there, the Citrix cloud pane, we don't have to worry about, have we got the SQL Server up, have we got this up, have we got this? It's already there for us. We've just had to got the cloud connectors to be able to communicate backwards and forwards, the AD there, and it's like, there you go, we're almost self-sufficient. The licensing service is probably our biggest bone of contention, because they're on site. But once you start then thinking about, hold on, especially with the, I think it's some of the I'm trying to think of one of the applications, and I think it's within our animation lab, you can actually have more than one license server. So we could then put a license server that's still physically on campus, but we can then put it into the cloud. So if we were to lose that connectivity back onto campus, it's there already in the cloud. So for some companies that are a bit forward thinking with rather than just have this one single point of failure with that, it's now we're going to have multiple license servers. So that's one of the spin-offs that we're now seeing. And it's the fact, again, going back to the gold image, we've got that one image, we can put the latest software onto that, take the snapshot, tell the Citrix cloud, use this snapshot now, and as soon as those machines either reboot or we force it to reboot, they've got the latest and greatest software, which people think, well, that's not really much of a DR. But if you think of people that are here, if you've used Config Manager to push out an application, it could take the next hour or it could take a week to push that application out. Now we can do it, and it's the next reboot, or within 24 hours, it's all done and dusted. Or if we want to be really mean to people, go, can you get off of all the WVD, and we're going to upgrade now? And it's like, oh, great. And it's the same also if there's a security patch that comes out and we're desperate to get that out, we can do that relatively quickly and get it out there up and running, and the users are back again being safe and secure. So it's got a number of, for me, a number of good points for it. It just, it works.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks, Quentin.
Thank you. What I did have a sort of final question for Simon, really, which was more about the future vision of the student workspace at Northumbria, and we touched on this throughout the chat. I mean, you've mentioned things. We talked about the digital campus. Quinton's talked about use cases whereby there've been people accessing courseware and so forth from like places such as Afghanistan, and maybe the expectation there was, the experience is great because it works, because I can get on to what I need to do to get my job done. We talk about the fact that, and Quinton, you talked about the fact that when people log in, they don't really care on which server their information resides. They just care about getting to it, really.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems clear from the conversation that the active blended learning model will continue going forward, that whilst there is a massive focus on being campus-based, there'd also be a space for the digital campus as well. I guess the key thing is there anything, what would you think, and it's probably a really open question to ask really late in the day, but what's the vision for, if you like, the student workspace at Northumbria, Simon? What kinds of additional technology or features would you think at a high level would enable that and give the best experience?
I mean, I think students are probably moving more to their own device. And the other thing I think which is interesting is a generation of students starting to come through where their mobile phone is their primary device.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting concept suddenly, because do you really want to reach for your mobile phone when you want to use some specialist software? But certainly for a lot of things, actually mobile phones are the first device of choice for some students. So I think there's probably some thinking that we might need to make around that for what that means for the future. I think there's probably some thinking about making it even easier. And what I mean at the moment is, we've landed on some desktops for our labs that we've spoken about. We also leverage Windows Virtual Desktop and the Microsoft Cloud, and we also present, at an application level. So we'll present apps in Citrix, so a streamed app as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that area will probably expand more, so we make it more intelligent. So as a student, after I use a specific piece of software, actually that software now comes to the front. So when I log into the Northumbria portal of software applications, it knows I've used this application multiple times before. It brings it to the front, and we make actually the delivery of those applications more intelligent to the device of our choice. And I think the other area then will be, because students start to bring their own device more and more to campus, because that's what they're used to, actually we probably need to move over to thinking about how we leverage thin clients more, that are greener, less expensive, and can deliver just as good an experience through the Citrix infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So we actually start thinking about what our hardware structure looks like across the university, because the days of buying lots and lots of desktops in a lab are probably diminishing as students actually either want to use their own device, or we can use a thin client because it's easier, because we can just stream the same application. So there's more to do, Steve. There's more to do.
Brilliant, thank you. And it's almost, you can almost see another webinar coming there, Simon, in terms of sustainability and cost of devices, but also, I guess, also the social media-like experience for students, as you say, their mobile phone is their first item of choice that they utilise, and there's a whole host of things around that. So,
just on that front, Steve, can I just ask Simon?
Yeah, please do, Craig. Yeah.
So, as you obviously touched on, students using their own devices, etc. What about students that suffer from, say, digital poverty or digital exclusion? How do you actually support those students?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a really good scheme actually that's been run across the university over the last 12 months. So we have what's known as an assisted learning fund. Some of this has also been funded by Office for Students actually over the COVID period. And students who have digital poverty can actually apply to our student support services. And we started off actually about 18 months ago giving a grant. But what we've done now actually is we actually now give a device. So we now actually give the students a device, and that device arrives at their door all packaged up and ready to go. They get 1 year's free support as well with that device. And they're ready to go. It's got an image on there that allows them just to get going. It links to the main applications that they can use. So we've invested quite heavily as a university to do that, recognising that digital poverty could be a problem as you move into a digital world.
No, it's really good to hear, Simon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I guess in the 8 minutes we've got left, what I might do is prevail upon my colleagues Rebecca, Benita, Ken and Jessica to see if there's any burning questions that have sort of come out during the chat. I guess, guys, I don't think you want to unmute yourself and just quickly flag. In fact, Jess, you've got your hand up. Do you want to quickly?
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. That was really, really insightful. There's been a couple of questions from Jim in the chat. I think we've actually covered one of the main questions, which is around digital poverty and how you're supporting those students in terms of access to university services. But there was another question from Jim around how you are handling 24/7 support for services when we may operate a 9-to-5 support service.
Good question.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. At Northumbria, we're in the lucky position because we run a service called Norman. So it provides 24/7 help desk support, not only for Northumbria, but also for 48 other institutions. Who flick their service desk over to us through out of hours support. So we have 24/7 IT support. So we're in the fortunate position, and obviously provide that support for other universities as well. So that's how we handle that. But it's a consideration, I guess, for a team that, if you have people who are now working 24/7, do you provide that support? Or do you consider actually if something's not working that it gets either picked up by your major incidents, or if it's an isolated incident, you pick it up in hours. So it's a consideration to make. I agree.
Excellent. Thanks, Jess. Thanks, Simon. So there's no more questions from anyone, unless I have one more actually, and I guess it's something.
Sorry, I'm not sure.
Oh, Alexa's kicking in. Really helpful. Artificial intelligence kicks in there. So yeah, we touched on this earlier, Simon. Actually, it might be worthwhile just sort of ending on this before we sort of finish. But you mentioned the fact that there's a digital campus. Now, Quinton, you talked about people logging in from Afghanistan and so forth. But I guess as you have this additional functionality, do you see Northumbria actually expanding beyond the UK in terms of its student catchment? Do you see yourselves going multinational? What does that look like from a digital perspective?
Well, I suppose, unlike any other university, we're a global university. We have global ambitions. We do have partners around the world at the moment. We have a campus out in Amsterdam at the moment. And I guess, this is an interesting way of looking at it, that, transnational education is here to stay at many universities, and we're one of those. So we have global ambitions. And just like our Amsterdam campus, if we wanted to spin a campus up now in another part of the globe, we've actually got a means for delivering our core technology there. There's clearly a license lens that you need to put over that, and Quinn touched on that before, and sometimes that's difficult. But at a technical level, there's a means for delivering applications now, because actually what we've got is, it might be able to deliver it to a student in Liverpool who's studying in Northumbria, but actually they could be sat anywhere in the globe. It doesn't matter anymore. So we've delivered at a high level an infrastructure that allows our specialist apps to be delivered anywhere, and that obviously would help in a campus that may get set up on the other side of the world.
Excellent. So it's almost a campus in a box model, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there are some other considerations that you need to put around that, and where your students sit, and the security around that. But certainly a means of delivering those secure applications. Yeah, we've got something now that we can build on, and it's the Citrix infrastructure and the infrastructure that Quinn and the team have built that's enabled us to do that. So it's very good.
Excellent. Simon, thank you. We have about 3 minutes left. I guess I'll lean across to my esteemed colleagues again. Benita, Rebecca, Jess, and Ken. Are there any more questions from your side that you've been able to sort of pick out over the last few minutes? No, I will take silence as an emphatic no there. So thank you. Simon and Quinton, is there anything else you wanted to add? I know we've sat here and we sort of asked you questions, very sort of Jeremy Paxman like. But is there anything more from your side you wanted to say or share in the few minutes we've got left?
No, I think I would share that. I guess my reflections on this is we needed to do something as a university, and we were quite lucky at the start of all of this that we had a path, and I think choosing the right path is the difficult thing sometimes on this, to get the strategy right. And there's a cost envelope that goes across all this. And my advice to institutions would be just to work out where the cost benefit is on all of this. Clearly for us, the Citrix delivery has been the cost benefit. We've allowed our specialist apps and our students to work remotely, and our staff to work remotely, and our staff to use a lab as if they were there physically. We're going to take that from the COVID situation and move it forward. But the backdrop is the cost benefit of where you see that. And for us, that's worked. And, clearly the offer's open to anyone on this call who wants to discuss it further, that they're welcome to get in touch.
But that's very kind of you. Thank you, Simon. And I think I will just give Quinton a quick forum. Is there anything else you want to raise in the sort of 90 seconds or so left?
90 seconds. I'll try and keep it very brief then for you. As Simon has said, if you need to reach out to us, please do so via Citrix, and we're more than happy to help others with it. The technology does actually work. You've just got to have a different mindset to how things you would put out on an ordinary PC as such, with config manager and all the rest of it. So for the people that are the technologists that you've got there, it's a different way of doing things. But once you've got your head around how it works and how it fits in, it is a technology that, hold on, it actually does deliver what we're trying to say here. It's not one of these where it goes, oh, that didn't really quite work. It's there, and it's got to be a two-way street with yourselves, with the likes of having a Craig there and being able to say, how do I do this? How do I get the better functionality out of it? So yes, it's just for the technology people out there, it's just a different way of doing things, and it works, and I'm happy with it.
That's marvelous, and you've kept within the hour. So thank you very much. So in the remaining seconds, what I'd like to do is thank all the attendees for attending and interacting so readily, for Benita and Becca and the team for fielding the chats and so forth, for my good friend and colleague Craig for co-opting this with me, and lastly and finally, and by no means least, to Simon and Quinton for your attention and your engagement, and you continuing to work with Citrix and our other customers. So again, thank you everyone. It's been absolutely illuminating, and we look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thanks, now.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone.